I do want to make it clear to everybody that today, this Sunday, unlike last Sunday or the Sunday before that, Debbie and I were able to get here to church in an uneventful kind of way. So it just, who says you can't improve in your old age, right? That's what I'm thinking about. But meanwhile, today is March 26th, and it was on this date in 1820 that Joseph Smith had his first vision. Joseph Smith, the guy who went on to found the Mormon Church, or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, his first vision of Moroni and the angels and the golden plates and all of that. And it was also on this date in 1830, 10 years later, that the Book of Mormon was first published. And I mean, that is the actual book, not the play. That comes much later. But the Book of Mormon was published on this date in 1830. The next year, in 1831, Richard Allen died. Richard Allen, I have been to Richard Allen's gravesite because it's in the basement of the Mother Bethel Church in Philadelphia. Richard Allen is one of the leading members of the African American Methodist community, founder of the Mother Bethel Church, first black bishop in the United States. He was made a bishop. What is that? Consecrated, ordained, I think is the word. Ordained a bishop by Asbury, and founded the Mother Bethel Church, which is still there. And if you talk to any African American Methodist of any persuasion, and then a lot of others, they all know who Richard Allen is. So that's kind of, he's sort of like to evangelicals, John Wesley. We would talk about John Wesley or Jonathan Edwards or one of those guys. He's right up there. And he's buried in the basement, and there he is, a big, nice room there. So, but that was it. It was also on this date, and I don't have the guy's name. I think it's Joseph Goham on this date in 1831, who was the governor of New Hampshire's son, Baptist minister. On this date wrote the hymn, He Leadeth Me. He leadeth me, O blessed thought, O words with heavenly comfort wrought, which is interesting to me because our previous music guy, not Mark, the current one, every once in a while would do something with that song that just used to drive me absolutely nuts. He would change. I don't know if it was him or if it was whatever the person who put it together did, but he would change the words of the song from "He leadeth me," He leadeth me, to "You leadeth me." So you would be singing. You're right. That is exactly right. And I'm like, that is a heinous subject-verb disagreement there. I mean, I get it. You didn't grow up with the King James, and you don't understand that. But at least check with someone. And it would just drive me that is just so bad grammar.
Humble thyself in the sight of the Lord.
Humble thyself, yes. Yeah, right. But it was on this date in 1945 that the Allied troops raised the flag on Iwo Jima. We've all seen the picture of the guys raising the flag. It was on this date. And it was also on this date in 1958 that at the 30th Academy Awards, The Bridge on the River Kwai won the Best Picture Award. Exactly, that movie, and which is an absolutely fabulous movie. I haven't seen it in a while, and I was looking for it last night, through the various things, and it's not available unless you buy a subscription to HBO Max. And I'm like, okay, I don't want to see it that much, but I'll just request it. Right, I was just going to say, request it from the library. The star of that movie was Alec Guinness, and he won an Academy Award for Best Actor. Although very few people nowadays know Alec Guinness for The Bridge on the River Kwai. Most of us know him as the original Obi-Wan Kenobi. Yes. A role that he took, he just took it kind of for the money. He just thought it was going to be a throwaway film and barely. I mean,
isn't that always the case with every role like that?
The way he says it, he was just literally just phoning it in, didn't realize it was going to become as big a deal as he thought it was going to be. But be that as it may. And in 1979, Israel and Egypt signed the famous Egypt-Israel peace treaty. Menachem Begin and Anwar Sadat, for which both of them got the Nobel Prize. Not Jimmy Carter, who brought them all together and did all the work, but Menachem Begin and Sadat got the prize. And finally, also dying on this date, Beethoven. Beethoven died on this date. He was 56 years old. Did not know he was that young. As did Maurice Barrymore. Maurice Barrymore died on this date in 1905. He was an actor. Many of you may know him as Drew Barrymore's great-grandfather. His son was John Barrymore. He had 3 kids, John, Ethel, and Lionel Barrymore, that were all actors. And John Barrymore was married 4 times, and one of his sons is Drew Barrymore's father. Got that? There'll be a test. No, I'm just kidding.
Which is the one in It's a Wonderful Life? Is there Barrymore? That's Lionel.
Fine. He would be John Barrymore Jr. I don't know if he's junior or not, but that would be John Barrymore's son, or Maurice Barrymore's son. Yeah, he wouldn't be a junior. But yeah, so that's it for today. So again, all of those things, and we got to church on time. So with yes. So it's a great day as far as I'm concerned. So we are continuing in Ecclesiastes, a thrilling, exciting, minute-by-minute romp through Ecclesiastes. And by the way, Jean was not able to be with us today, so everybody say hi to Jean, because she
Hi, Jean.
okay. She requested we send her the link to the video when I put it up there. And you know, it's interesting going through Ecclesiastes for a number of reasons. One, because it's just a book we don't go through a lot. You know, it's just one of those that we don't talk about. And because, you know, you kind of look at it and go, it defies easy application, which is kind of what American Bible usage comes to. You know, it's like I read a verse and I want to apply it to my life. And it kind of defies that. And it's also a book that you really have to get the big picture. It's easy to apply as a whole, to look at it as a whole and go, this is proof of this. It's hard to look at one particular verse and say, oh, this means that. Or I need to do this because this verse says that. And given its whole picture that we talk about, you know, it's one of those things that, you know, you really don't want to base any strong belief on something out of the book of Ecclesiastes. Okay, I'm not saying you can't, but I'm just, you know, and we'll talk about that in a second when we get to something today. But another thing about Ecclesiastes, last week we talked about the passage where God said He has put eternity in His heart. Talking about God has put eternity in man's heart, and we talked about what that meant, and was that an indication that there was some belief in the afterlife at that point? And I was saying, no, I didn't think it was. But the point I want to make about that is Debbie reminded me, or pointed out to me on the way home, that another translation, and it's right here in my NIV notes, I don't, you know, that another way to translate that particular word is ignorance. It said He has put ignorance in hearts. Now, my point is not to debate which one is right or not. It's to point out how at the mercy of translators we are. Okay, because that's a big difference. He's put eternity, He's put ignorance. Okay, if the same word can mean both things, you know, it's like, okay, which is it? Because that's like a really big difference. And we often don't think that way when we think about, you know, we think when we're looking at our translation, we're like, okay, this is. It's like, no, there's been a lot of interpretive questions answered when they start looking at the various texts. And I'm not saying one is right or one is wrong. You know, and we don't have much choice. We don't have much choice. I mean, we could all become Hebrew scholars, okay, give up 5-10 years of our life, you know. But see, the thing is, the Hebrew scholars don't agree as far as should it be ignorance or should it be eternity. So again, it's just something to think about when, as you're looking at a translation, that each translation you have, and this goes back to, one of my earliest classes I ever did here was talking about the various different translations. And I personally am indifferent almost to what translation a person uses. Everyone has its advantages, everyone has its disadvantages. But it's like if you say, I like this translation, and you have a good reason why, then that's fine with me. You like the King James? God bless you. The best translation of the Bible. Does anybody remember? What is the best translation of the Bible? Anyone?
The one you read.
The one you're going to read, yes. So the most accurate translation of the Bible sitting on a shelf isn't doing anybody any good. But if you're reading it, even if it's the New World Translation, which is the Jehovah's Witness version, or the Rima. What's the Catholic Rima? Is that the Rima version? What's it called? I think it's called.
The Jerusalem Bible,
Anyone, if you're going to read it, that's the one that matters. So, all right, so much for that. That's my very long introduction to today's, where we're going to start talking in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, beginning with verse 16. So last week, I know I sent you all home humming that Pete Seeger tune, Turn, 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 and we talked about what that meant or could mean, how it's used, and the bottom line was that it isn't necessarily supposed to be upbeat. It isn't supposed to cheer you up and say, oh, isn't this great, cute little tune kind of thing. It's sort of like, these things happen and God's in control of it and we can't, and what are you going to do about it? But then in verse 16, he says, and this is where I'm starting, and I saw something else under the sun. This is Kohelet's way of changing the subject. He does this, or bringing up a new subject along the same line. And I saw something else under the sun in verse 16. In the place of judgment, wickedness was there. In the place of justice, wickedness was there. And so our first answer there is that Kohelet sees corruption in the courts. Trying to find where is the one. Oh, there it is. Okay. I knew I answered my own question. So it's always dangerous if I don't answer the questions, because then I'm looking, I don't know what that is. It makes perfect sense when I'm filling out the handout, but unless I fill in the answers right away, I'm like, I forget. Did I mention we did make it to church on time? So that's my victory for the day, so I can make all kinds of mistakes from here on out. Kohelet sees corruption in the courts. I'm going to call it the court system, okay? And this is another area that throws a question on the authorship, like who is Kohelet? Okay, and it's, again, Kohelet is the person doing the talking at this point, and Kohelet is either King Solomon, or it's somebody who wants you to think it's King Solomon. Okay, you want to get, it definitely gives what seems to be a Solomonic perspective. This is what the kingdom is like at its height, and yet you see this. And the argument is that the court system surely is something that a king could have an influence on. A king could, and this is an area that surely a king could have some influence in, right? And so, it just seems sort of disingenuous for the actual king, for Solomon, to be writing, wow, there's all kinds of problems in the court system. And again, this is a king. Now, if the president looks at the court system and says there's something wrong with it, he can't snap his finger and fix it, much as they might want to. And so this is one of the passages that kind of throws a suggestion that, well, is it really Solomon that's actually doing the writing here? Now, again, it could be that the problems were so systemic and so deep and so broad spread that even Solomon in all his power and glory couldn't have fixed them, and that it's just something about the nature of the universe. You could make that argument, or you could just say, this is Kohelet throwing shade at Solomon. It's like, here we had this supposedly godly king, and we're at the peak of our power. Everything is firing on all 8 cylinders, supposedly, according to the promises and the law and everything, and yet here we've got this injustice going on in the court system. Okay? But in verse 17, he says, I said to myself, God will bring into judgment both the righteous and the wicked. So the point here is, and I think Kohelet is saying, well, justice isn't being done in the court, but God's going to bring it all to justice someday, which is just sort of an assertion on his part. For there will be a time for every activity, a time to judge every deed. Okay? And I think this kind of echoes back to, the first 8 verses of the chapter, talking about times that, when it comes around in time, someday, these people are going to get theirs. Don't quite know when, but someday they're going to get theirs. Okay? Which, on the one hand is I guess, is a reassuring. On the other hand, to those that are involved, it isn't much. If somebody is found innocent of a crime in the American jurisprudence system, judicial system, that for one reason or another, you absolutely know that person did and it affected you, and he or she gets off of that crime, you could say to yourself, well, God's going to judge him someday. That doesn't make it feel any better, necessarily. I mean, I've not been in that situation, but I'm just kind of imagining how it would look. And so it's kind of like, well, maybe God is going to judge them someday, And then he goes on in verse 18. So let's see. Q asserts that every deed will be judged by God, which is true in one way or another. I mean, it's, we can even go to the New Testament and say, yeah, your deeds are going to be judged. Now, as far as those who have not been converted or are not a member of the elect, regardless of how you get there, speaking of questions to ask, but that part is going to be a very short, because you only have to prove one thing. Have you sinned once? And that's really all it takes. You don't have to go through the whole list. You just say, one, okay, that's it. That's all we need to prove. If that's, and again, I'm not making any theological explanation on how that all is going to work, but be that as it may. But in verse 18, he goes on and he says, he starts talking, he's getting back to this idea of where humans are. Remember, he did about comparing the rich to the poor and the wise to the foolish, and they're all the same. And why are the foolish and the wise the same? And the bottom line, they're going to the same, and the rich and the poor are the same, because everybody dies. Everybody dies. There's a. I'm a fan of this Australian singer. Her name is Casey Chambers, and she's got a song that's "We're all going to die someday." She's like an Australian country singer, but it's "We're all going to die someday. We're all going to die someday, Lord. We're all going to die someday." And basically it's like, have fun, because we're all going to die someday. It's just a cheery little song about the fact that we're all doomed to death. But be that as it may. So he started talking about animals versus humans. Okay, so in here, beginning with verse 18, I also said to myself, as for humans, God tests them so that they may see that they are like the animals. So God is throwing out this test so that you can see that they're like the animals. When it comes right down to it, surely the fate of human beings is like that of the animals. The same fate awaits them both. As one dies, so dies the other. All have the same breath. Okay? Humans have no advantage over animals. Everything is meaningless. All go to the same place. All come from dust, and to dust all return. So to Kohelet at this moment, as he's looking at things, he's like, wow, the rich and the poor doesn't make any difference. Wise and the foolish doesn't make any difference. Human and animal doesn't make any difference. We're all going to die. Now again, think back to the big picture of Ecclesiastes. The big picture of Ecclesiastes is, this is what life is like under the sun. This is like a kind of a quasi-deistic view of things. This is the best it's going to get. If you remove God actively from the equation, this is what you get. So he's looking at life in Israel at the time of Israel's peak, and he's saying, really, everything is going right, but it really doesn't matter. Okay, again, this is under the sun. That's the key phrase that you have to remember. Everything in Ecclesiastes, except when we get to the very end, everything is how life is under the sun. It is not a representation of how life has to be or how our own existence is, nor is it necessarily true. Okay, this is just his observation. To him, there's no difference between animals and humans. No difference between the rich and the poor. No difference between the foolish and the wise. Okay? Again, that's the interesting thing about Ecclesiastes. We don't have to look at Ecclesiastes, and we get in trouble because, again, it kind of defies our easy application approach to the Bible. It's like, wait a minute, how do I apply that to my life? How can I really make that useful in my family relationships? Well, you can't, you know? I mean, you know, if you have kids, there are times when you think, wow, you're just like, you know, I've known dogs that are cleaner than you, you know, kind of thing. Okay, maybe that was just us. Okay, but you know what I mean? Sometimes you may think that, but that's not coming from Ecclesiastes. That's just, you know. So, again, yes?
I was just going to, do you think it's hard for Christians who have got the New Testament in their brains and we're reading this and we're like, I feel like we're constantly filling in or making it mean something that it might not. Like,
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Yeah. I mean, the question is whether people who are, you know, New Testament focused, you know, have a hard time with Ecclesiastes because we start filling things in. Yes, it is. But I would say that happens with every book of the Bible, that we fill in what we want to hear. And so, like, one of the things that I try to do is say, okay, this is what the text says. You know, at least this is as close as we can come to what the author is saying. And how you fill in the application is kind of, you know, sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's not quite so much, you know. But then in verse 21, he has an interesting statement here. So he's talking about animals and humans being the same because everybody dies. But then he asks a question. He says, who knows if the human spirit rises upward and if the spirit of the animal goes down into the earth? You know, who knows? Okay, now, a New Testament person could look at that and say, I do. Okay? And I think that's a fair thing, but I mean, at least here, and again, I said, and I pointed out that one of the things about Ecclesiastes is, and one of the principles that's kind of riding through the whole book is that death is the final equalizer, death is the end, and that the idea of an afterlife isn't well developed in the Old Testament. It's not that it's not there, okay? It isn't as well developed in the Old Testament as it is in the New Testament, okay? So it is there. There are hints of it. There are, you know, so people are talking about it. So, I mean, to me, this kind of suggests that Kohelet knows that there are people who think there's got to be more than simply this. There's got to be something else. And Kohelet is at least admitting to being agnostic on it at this point. Maybe, who knows? Maybe I'm wrong. You know, I guess that's kind of like if I was translating it, that's what I would put. Maybe I'm wrong, you know. Because Hebrew scholars do that a lot. When they're translating this stuff, it's called an emendation, which is a fun word. It's where they just literally put a word in there just to make it. This is what I think this passage says, and if I add a word, it'll make it clearer that that's what this word means, and it's called an emendation. And there's a lot of them in Ecclesiastes, and I think there's a lot in other books of the Bible as well. But who knows? So in 3:21 suggests a hope for an eternal destiny. So, you know, so he's in this reflective mood. I don't know. Maybe there's something, you know. Maybe there's something after life. But really, you know. And he says, and to conclude his point here, he says, so I saw that there is nothing better for a person than to enjoy their work, because that is their lot. For who can bring them to see what will happen after them? Okay? So in this agnostic moment, when he says, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, maybe there's something, but really all we can put our hands on is that you just enjoy your work. Enjoy your existence, enjoy your life. And again, this is a theme that is repeated over and over through Ecclesiastes when he says, you know, it doesn't, you know, and again, looking at the average person at the time, his instructions here at Kohelet are to, you know what, just Enjoy where you are. Don't get hung up on the meaninglessness of it, the hebel of it. Just enjoy your work. Okay? Because that's their lot, for who can bring them to see what will happen after them? Who is it that's going to do that? Who's going to show him? Well, I mean, we could say Jesus does. You know, those of us in New Testament focused kind of thing. Who is going to do that? He suggests, and in the end, enjoying your work is the best you get under the sun. Okay, under the sun. Again, the key there is this is all under the sun. You know, life, you know, without God. You know, if you've ever been on say you've been on a team, either a sports team, a committee, or whatever, and that committee has that group that you're in has a main player or a ringer or something that you're used to having on the team. Okay, and let's whatever, you know, and all of a sudden you discover that at your next event, the next game or the next meeting or the next whatever, the main player isn't going to be there. It can't be there. So what do you do? Well, you sit.
Next week, my goodness, you're not here.
Well, yeah. I forgot I was going to point that out. But what are you going to do? How do you describe what you're going to do? Well, you sit there and say, okay, well, in the absence of this guy, this is what we're going to have. This is the best we're going to be able to accomplish with this person out of the room, with this person not there. Okay, so that's kind of, you know, his point here. Okay, we're not talking. There's no covenant God involved here. There's the Creator God. There's no question of an acknowledgement of the Creator God. And again, it borders on a deistic viewpoint, all right? But he does not refer to the covenant God. He does not, you know, refer to having individual relationships with God or a God that intimately does things or wants to fellowship with people. And so you remove that and you're making this contingency plan. Okay? And so Ecclesiastes is sort of this great grand contingency plan. So like if somebody says to you at some point in life, well, I don't need God, I can do well. Yeah, the country can do well without God. We don't need God. Okay, well, read Ecclesiastes and that's what you're going to get. Yes, there are good people. There's no question about it. But there's going to be injustice in the courts and there's going to be all the other problems that we'll continue to talk about. Moving on to chapter 4, beginning with verse 1. Again I looked, another change of subject. Again I looked and saw all the oppression that was taking place under the sun. All the oppression. Now Kohelet is now going to start talking about oppression. A very broad word. You know, of course I'm, you know, for those of us who have ever seen, you know, Monty Python and the Holy Grail, you know, how many will admit to have seen Monty Python and the Holy Grail? Yeah.
How many can quote almost the whole movie?
Yeah. Well, there's one. My favorite scene is when King Arthur comes up on Michael Palin playing in the mud, you know, and King, who's king? We didn't vote for you. You don't vote for a king, kind of thing. And then he says, shut up, and he picks up Michael Palin and carries him off. Look, I'm being repressed. Help, I'm being oppressed, kind of thing. But be that as it may, you know, oppression. You know, again, it's a broad phrase, and generally it's almost like one of those things that we know it when we see it. It's this abuse of power that comes from being under the sun. Okay, and he looks at it. He says, again, I looked and I saw all the oppression that was taking place under the sun. I saw the tears of the oppressed, and they have no comforter. Power was on the side of their oppressors, and they have no comforter. Okay, so again, this is another one of those indications that, okay, if you're the king, if you're Solomon, if you are, you know, the most powerful king in Israel's history, couldn't you do something about this? Wouldn't you do something about this? Okay, again, we're going back. If it's Solomon doing the writing, the point is it's just so bad that, you know, you can't just legislate it away. Okay, you can't just, you know, because perhaps you could argue that for Solomon to do that, for Solomon to fix the problem would require more oppression. I don't know. Or it's called, pardon me?
Is he delusional? I mean, if this is written, I was just going back in my notes that were written, if it's Solomon, it's later near the end of his reign when things are starting to fade anyway. I mean, that's what, he asked for wisdom. He had a relationship
Mm-hmm.
with God. It's like, I don't know, if he sees what he's done and it's all a reflection, his sin or his realizing how much of an animal he is in the face of God and having screwed the pooch, so to speak.
I don't know that I'll repeat that for the video.
No.
No, I'm
But you know how he just
perhaps so perhaps
had
something.
so much and messed it and let himself be corrupted by wives or power and realizing he's no better than.
That's one way to look at it. I mean, I don't think that's you
This is
could
for-
certainly
I'm sorry.
no that Solomon, at some point in his life realizes, hey, this is not. I took a wrong turn somewhere, and we're gonna hold that thought for a second because we're going to come back to it in a later passage today. All right, and then we'll talk about that. Okay, but so they have no comforter. Okay, so again, here there's no comforter. There's oppression going on. There's no comforter. There's no people aren't helping each other. And again, of course, you can think of the John 3:16, not John 3:16, John 14:26. There it is. Q decides to address oppression, and the oppressed have no choice, or they have no. I'm sorry, no choice, no comforter. Again, remember in John 14:26, but the Comforter, which is the Holy Spirit, well, it's called. That's the King James translator. I think the NIV translates it Advocate. But he says that because of this, he comes to this great conclusion, and I declare that the dead who had already died are happier than the living who are still alive. Okay, this is a cheery thought, right? It's better to be dead than alive here, And we have people today who feel this way. I mean, again, I'm not trying to get into, and I think another interesting thing to look at this kind of the overall kind of zeitgeist that's going through Ecclesiastes and compare that to what we see in the news, as far as, the suicide rates are high. Any suicide is high, but I mean, it's kind of going up. But then if that's not dark enough, he gets darker. But better than both is the one who has never been born, who has not seen the evil that is done under the sun. Now, this is interesting. In Job chapter 3, Job, in his moments of anguish is like, better that I had never been born. And Jeremiah says the same thing about himself in Jeremiah 20. Okay, but here, I mean, Kohelet is like going, people that are never born are better off than anybody who's here, alive or that has died. And I mean, we have people that are ascribing to that kind of idea today. That we don't want to have children because we don't want to bring anybody into this world, kind of thing. So it's like, that's another element of Ecclesiastes that we say, wow, it's like, how do you know you're in a nation that is running under the sun, absent God? Well, you got people running around going, hey, better to never be born. Let's not bring another child into this. I mean, I'm sorry, did you?
Yeah, I'm just curious. What is a person who has never been born? It's hard to wrap your mind around.
Yeah.
Define that.
So, and I saw verse, let's see, where am I? The oppressed have no choice. And then beginning with the next verse, or in verse 3 there, he starts using, I'm sorry?
No comforter.
What am I?
The oppressed have no comforter.
Right, yes. The oppressed have no comforter. And then Q starts using better than Proverbs. Okay, better than. It's better this than that. Like from Proverbs, they're fairly common in Proverbs, better to live in the corner of a housetop than with a brawling woman and in a white house. That's one of my favorite, personally. I'm not making any comment about our household. Our household is fine. I mean, we did make it here today on time. Did I point that out? Okay, good. Small victories, baby steps. But So better than both is the one who has never been born, who has not seen the evil that is done under the sun. Okay? Verse 4, and I saw that all the toil and all achievement spring from one person's envy of another. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Now the word envy there sometimes is translated rivalry. It's interesting. Up in chapter 22, he said, enjoy your work. But here it's like, okay, don't get too ambitious about it. Okay? It says, any achievement, per Kohelet, only comes from envy or jealousy. Okay, well, I mean, I suppose if you define the word broadly enough, there's some accuracy to the idea. I want to do better, but, it's one of those you're never going to, you're never going to win. There's always someone. In a world of 8 billion, there's always somebody that's doing it better. There's a better Sunday school lesson on Ecclesiastes going on somewhere, I'm sure of it. Maybe one that's happy. I don't know. But be that as it may, it's like it all comes from envy. And to illustrate it, he uses this interesting, he gives verses 5 and 6, there's like 3 different steps here. There's three different examples. Fools fold their hands and ruin themselves, talking about work. Fools fold their hands or just, kind of just not going to do anything. Just why work? I'm just going to die, just going to starve. Okay? Better one handful with tranquility than 2 handfuls with toil and chasing after the wind. Okay? So I think that one handful with tranquility, okay, this is what I need, I'm done. Or to be envious and grab 2 and then be chasing after the wind. Okay, so again, I think the point is, know when to say enough. I think his point here, that if you don't say no, don't be the fold your hands, I'm not doing that. Couldn't do anything about it. And don't be the go-getter person that's, running out of, or running on just jealous ambition kind of stuff. It says just know tranquility and have enough kind of thing. I remember years ago there was I remember a Mad Magazine thing, and it was 2 people that they were making a joke about if somebody has a tragedy on the phone, somebody's talking to somebody on the phone, and there's a tragedy going on, that we're very good at sympathizing with them. We're very good at sympathizing with them. But then they give the example of somebody who, for their birthday, bought them a lottery ticket. So person A buys person B a lottery ticket, and then person B wins the big lottery with the lottery ticket. And then there's that phone call. Hey, that gift you gave me? I won $100 million. I don't remember what the number is. Imagine you got that phone call. Imagine you bought a lottery ticket for somebody. I know, a stretch for some of us. Okay. Imagine you bought a lottery ticket for someone and somebody won the lottery big time. And they called you to say, hey, guess what? I won $100 million in the lottery with that ticket you gave me. Okay? So, rejoice with those who rejoice, right?
Yeah.
What would would be great. And all of us are going, okay, and how much are you going to share with me? Right? I mean, come on, that's what we're all thinking it, but be that as it may. All right, I'll move on, because I need to get to this next point. Again, I saw something meaningless under the sun. Another change of subject. There was a man all alone. Now, this is the story of the lonely miser here. This is kind of what it's called here. Q tells the parable of the lonely miser. Oh, the early ones. One should work, verse 5 and 6, in order to get just enough. Just enough. Q tells the parable of the lonely miser. There was a man all alone. He had neither son nor brother. Okay? What's interesting to me is there's no mention of a wife here. Okay? I don't know why. Well, okay. So he must not, well, yet there was no end to his toil, yet his eyes were not content with his wealth. I mean, I do like that, that image. His eyes were not content with his wealth. Could look out and go, I guess I own all of this, but not quite enough. These 2 hands grasping, toiling, But then he apparently comes to his senses here, which kind of reminds me of Luke 15 with kind of from the opposite direction, the tale of the prodigal son, as you recall. The It says that the son is, the younger son is in a field, starving, feeding pigs, and then the text says he came to his senses, kind of thing, right? And here, perhaps that's what this guy does. He's working, and he realizes, wow, I'm amassing this huge bank account. I've got all of this stuff, and what good is it? Okay, we get back to Kohelet's earlier complaint about who's going to inherit my stuff. I'm going to get out, and I'm going to have to give it to a fool. And I think that's kind of the same point he's making here. For whom am I toiling, he asks, and why am I depriving myself of enjoyment? Okay, so again, he's not, is verse 22, he's not just enjoying his work. He's got two hands, two handfuls with toil and chasing after the wind. Okay, why am I still doing this? Again, this under the sun, these are the decisions you make. Okay, this too is meaningless. A miserable business. A miserable business. I like that. I think we should now title all of our church meetings, the Wednesday night, the miserable business meetings, because it's a biblical phrase. Well, it's, just kidding. Miserable business. Okay. And so we don't know what the lonely miser decides. He may be a type A kind of guy that just he's just driven that way, but he just says this is meaningless. Again, this is two handfuls with toil and chasing after the wind. But now, in keeping with this idea of this guy who's all alone, we move into another fairly well-known passage in Ecclesiastes. Okay, chapter 9. I'm going to read the passage, and we're going to come back and talk about it. Chapter 9. 2 are better than one because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. Also, if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. Okay, so he's going on. So coming out of this story about the miser, this person who is alone, by himself, nobody to share his stuff with, and I think now Kohelet is coming into, in this universe under the sun, companionship is good. Okay, again, go back to Genesis. It's not good for man to be alone. Okay, but I don't think that this passage is necessarily talking about marriage. Okay, I think it's more talking about companionship, of which certainly marriage is a subset of companionship, no question about it. Okay, but I think the general gist here is companionship. If you look at the reasons he gives, and I say here, two are better than one, then your teacher believes this is not a text about marriage, but about companionship. And we'll see why that's important as we get down here. So he gives 5 reasons why companionship is good. Okay, the first one is it's you get a good return on your labor. Okay, 2 are better than one because they have a good return for their labor. Okay, well, I mean, at the least, you can get twice as much done. You can move twice as many rocks if moving rocks is what your job is. Okay? If you have 2 people, one of them can do what he or she is slightly better at, and you can do what you're slightly better at, and you can do more together than you can separately. Okay? So you get a good return on your labor, a better return on your labor than you would if you're not. Now, I was thinking about this the other day that, I was subbing in a class that was called Production Tech, which is like shop. Okay, so shop class. At Bolingbrook High has a shop class. For those who think shop is gone, it's not. It's just called something different. I'm in this big room. They've got power saws and sanders and drills and the whole 9 yards. Okay, all this kind of stuff. And unfortunately, when there's a sub in the room, they can't use the power tools, right? So they had this box of old scraps of wood. And there were 3 students, particularly in this particular class, where their job was to sort this box of wood based on size and whether or not there were nails in it or not. Okay, now it's a box of wood. It's about this big, maybe 3 feet long by 1.5 feet wide, and about 1.5 feet deep, full of scraps of wood. So I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, by myself, it would take me probably 20 minutes to go through that and right size, right, yes, no, 20 minutes, okay? So I put 3 high school juniors on the task, and it reminded me of the old Scoutmaster adage that I used to go by when I was a Scoutmaster. You know, 1 boy, 1 brain, 2 boys, half a brain, 3 boys, no brain. So after 50 minutes of work on this particular task, they got about 1/3 of the way through the box. Three boys. So again, even though we're dealing with the under the sun here, the two, I don't know, I just remember sitting there watching these guys. It's like, could you take any longer on that? I mean, it's like you were trying to make this take longer, and which in fact I think they were. But you get a good return on your labor. You have to pick the right partner, okay? But secondly, they're helpful in emergencies. It's helpful to have somebody with you in emergencies, okay? If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. Suppose if you don't have the clapper at your home or something, you live by yourself.
Well, not the 3 kids you just described.
Well, that's true, yeah. Well, again, this is an Ecclesiastes, so we don't have to really go strong on the, But if either of them falls down, one can help the other up. Well, yeah, so it's helpful to have a companion in an emergency, So that's the second one. The third reason, warmth. Okay, warmth. And this was always a fun one. I remember when I was in college. This was a verse that we used to talk about. We used to jokingly refer to. This is why we need to get married. Okay. Also, if 2 lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? I don't know that it was necessarily recommended to use that in your notes to your significant other. Hey, this is my verse. I was thinking about you today. Here's my, But again, it's not, here, I think it's because of this one people talk about, oh, well, here he's clearly talking about marriage. Not necessarily. I mean, it's, there's stories, people in cold situations where you bed together just for warmth. Okay? There's a great story from American history about Benjamin Franklin and John Adams going to meet a British general somewhere. And they went to go to meet this general, and on the way they stayed at an inn where they only had 1 bed. So they shared the bed. Okay? And there were 2 things about it that were interesting. John Adams was quite shocked to realize that Benjamin Franklin slept with au naturel, as they say, which kind of, Adams was fairly prim and proper kind of guy, and Franklin was not, to say the least. And so here he's got Ben Franklin buck naked sitting there, and then they apparently all night had this thing about whether they should leave the window open or not. And so this is John Adams and Ben Franklin, okay, founding fathers. They're in this bed, sharing this bed, and getting up and opening the window, going back to bed. 5 minutes later, the other one gets up, closes the window. 5 minutes later, the other one gets up, opens the window. Yes, there's a part of the Constitutional Convention. These are the guys right here. This is true. There's
Never had that picture in my mind.
Pardon me?
Never had that picture.
Yeah. It's true. It's a true story. But you can check Walter Isaacson's biography of Ben Franklin. We'll verify it, and I think it's also in McCullum's. Who?
I don't remember that. I know that specific detail of Benjamin Franklin being naked.
Yeah.
I didn't get that from that, as I recall. But it's in Isaacson.
Isaacson.
I got to read that one.
So, but be that as it, so helpful in warmth. Okay, and the 4th reason here is that helpful in case of being attacked, which is kind of like an emergency, but though one may be overpowered, 2 can defend themselves. Okay, so again, helpful in being attacked. Okay, and then of course the 5th reason is because there is safety in numbers, and that is the verse that says, "A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken." Okay, now that last phrase here, "A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken," or is not easily broken, is an interesting phrase because it is all over the map. I mean, you see this thing in a lot of different places. St. Ambrose, who normally is he's a fairly well-known Bible scholar from the day back in the day. And by back in the day, I mean like I don't know when Ambrose was around, 1200, something like, I don't know, he's from way back, okay, way back. Looked at this and saw this was a picture of the Trinity in Ecclesiastes, which I'm like, no, I'm sorry. Ambrose, you're a great guy, you're a saint and all, but no, this is not the Trinity. And it's also common to use this as a wedding thing, okay, where husband, wife, and God. See the cord of 3 strands, and they tie a knot sort of thing, and they braid it kind of thing. Now, if you did it, you don't have to confess here, but that's sort of an interesting way. I mean, I saw this one picture. You just Google images for a cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. And you can there's all kinds of these, Hobby Lobby things you can get where it says a cord of 3 strands is not broken, which is one of those like, why, what does that mean? A cord of 3, and most rope is made with 3 strands. Back when they used to make rope, I mean, nowadays it's all plastic, so most of the rope you see is plastic, and it's a multi-strand, not just 3. But I've seen different. I saw one where cord of 3 strands is not broken, and they have this knot on it, which, being a scout leader and somebody who knows a thing or two about how to tie knots, I'm looking at that. That's a beautiful knot, but it's made out of 2 ropes. Like, so me, I'm the only person in the world that might look at that and go, there's only 2 ropes in that rope image that goes along with a picture that says a cord of 3 strands cannot be broken. There's only 2 ropes in that picture. But again, I think here he's just talking, it's safety in numbers. He's still talking about companionship. And you certainly don't want to make this a passage about marriage, because then it's like, okay, well, who's the third person? And that's where you bring in, oh, that's God. And it's like, yeah, I don't. He's just talking about, under the sun, it's better to have friends than not have friends. I'm sorry, you have?
I've got a question about the structure. Starting at verse 9, is this a new chapter, a different essay, written at a different time, a different author? Is there any organic connection to what's gone before? Or is he just, I know I'm going to throw some wisdom, or is this something taken from somewhere else and plugged down there? Do you see a connection?
Well, I see a connection between 8 and 9,
Okay.
because 8 is talking about this guy who's alone,
Okay.
who's by himself.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
And then comes into verse 9, and now 2, if there were 2 of them, then he wouldn't be a lonely miser, there'd be somebody else with him.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
I see that. But other than that, it is, it could be, I mean, one way to look at the Solomonic authorship of it is to say, well, Solomon just wrote these various observations and somebody put them together. The frame narrative put them together, and he or she plunked it right there. So whether there's there is sort of a shift at the later, in the latter half of the book, where we get to more of a simply like Proverbs, where it's just a series of statements as opposed to just this ongoing diatribe about being under the sun, sort of thing. So I said all that to say, it could be just plunked down there, but I see it connected to verse 8 at least. Okay, verse 13, and this is coming back to your question. This verse 13, where he's going to talk about some believe that 4:13 through 16 is the story based on real people. Okay, let's read it. Better a poor but wise youth than an old but foolish king who no longer knows how to heed a warning. The youth may have come from prison to the kingship, or he may have been born in poverty within his kingdom. I saw that all who lived and walked under the sun followed the youth, the king's successor. There was no end to all the people who were before him, but those who came later were not pleased with the successor. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Okay, so some look at this and think, okay, this is who are the real people? Well, one idea is that it's Joseph, that he's referring to Joseph. Okay, that Joseph was a poor but wise youth, better than an old and foolish king, being Pharaoh. And then, to me that's a tenuous, at best, I'm just throwing it out there. This is what some people have looked at this and said. Okay. Others look at this and think that this is Solomon talking about himself. Now, was Solomon a poor but wise youth? No. Okay. But, maybe it's like in America where nobody thinks they're rich. or nobody will admit to, very few, I shouldn't say nobody, but very few people think that they're rich. I mean, I know that there was a previous president who gave an interview and was talking about his success in the real estate business. And he admitted that his father had started him off with a small loan. Okay, it was a small loan. Now, to me, a small loan is, can you buy my lunch at McDonald's today? That's a small loan. To this previous president, it was $1 million. That was a small loan. And I suppose if you're worth $1 billion, $1 million is a small loan. So, but again, in America, nobody wants to admit that they're rich, even though, the poverty line in the U.S. is like well above the average daily earnings in a huge number of countries in the world. I mean, compared to the world, almost every American is wealthy. But be that as it may, let's save that for another diatribe some other time. But it's like, better a poor but wise youth. And looking at this story, then there's the question of looking at it, it's like, okay, are there 2 or 3 characters in this story? Okay, I'm for the 2. Okay, so there's this old and foolish king who no longer knows how to heed a warning. And so maybe this is Solomon talking about himself. Maybe in his, like you were saying, that maybe, in his old age, he's looking at himself, I really gone off the rails somewhere. I really missed the boat somewhere, And maybe we would be better with a poor but wise youth who came in to take over for me. Somebody who can kind of put this train back on the track, okay? The youth may have come from prison to the kingship, or he may have been born in poverty within his kingdom. I saw that all who lived and walked under the sun followed the youth. Now this is, again, the way it's phrased makes him think he's talking about something he's actually seen. Okay? Who followed the youth. So is this youth the one he was talking about earlier? So that's where you get to, are there 2 youths or there 1 youth? Again, I'm with the 2 youth, or the 2 character. There's a youth, there's a king. Okay? And the youth becomes the king's successor. Okay, so it's like, okay, so things should have gotten better, right? The better that a wise youth, than this old foolish king who can't follow directions anymore, or doesn't know how to heed a warning. But those who came later were not pleased with his successor, and they didn't like him either. Okay, which again, how often does that happen? It's like, so 8 years ago in Homer Glen, my beautiful hometown of Homer Glen, we had this election where the incoming administration, or the mayoral candidate at the time, filed his things wrong. He didn't follow the rules. Okay, he filed his, and there are all kinds of tricky rules as far as how you file to run for. It's just kind of interesting, and he didn't do it correctly. And so the incumbent mayor, they have people that check these things, and they called him on it. And the clerk of the county said, no, that you did not file correctly. You can't be on the ballot. Well, of course, that was just a political trick. It's like, no, it wasn't a political trick. You didn't follow the rules. I mean, get somebody to tell you how to fill the forms out correctly, right? But so this mayoral candidate ran a write-in campaign. Okay, and again, railing against the big city tricks and all of that kind of stuff, and we need to, people over politics was their campaign slogan. Okay, and oh yeah, we're going to bring, none of this kind of stuff anymore. Okay, that was 8 years ago. Okay? So now we have another election, and let's just say that there was those who came later were not pleased with the successor. Now there's this movement. Now there's a term limit thing, but everybody is like more than willing to see this guy out the door. I mean, Homer Glen, this is where the mayor signed something and then swore he didn't sign it, and so they paid like a few $1,000s to get a handwriting expert in to prove that he had signed it. I'm not making this up.
Wow.
Okay, so this is your property taxes at work, but it's like, okay. 8 years later, the politics over or people over politics party is like, no, nobody's sad to see this guy go. Okay, it's a local town mayor. So I'm like, okay. I mean, I know who he is. If I see him, I go, hey, that's the mayor of Homer Glen. You know, and it didn't help that the previous mayor was a Daley. Okay, yeah, he was Richard Daley's Republican cousin. But no, I'm serious about that. But be that as it may. So I think the bottom line is that under the sun, what does this tell us? Under the sun, this kind of popularity is temporary. It's ephemeral. It is hebel. It is meaningless. Yeah, they love you now. Okay? But, with very rare exceptions, you get a president, once they get into their second term and after their 6th year, they cease to be relevant. People that stop paying attention to the president at all, and it all becomes who's going to run the next time. That's the way the media works in the U.S. But still, this popularity is temporary. It's hebel. Okay. The bottom line seems to be that advancement is hebel. That is that Hebrew word that's translated meaningless or vanity or futile kind of thing. That this is one of those things that we seek for, thinking it's going to give us lasting import, and Kohelet says, under the sun, it's not. Under the sun, it's not. Okay, I'll call it there before we get into chapter 5. And I think, the thing is, again, looking at Ecclesiastes, we're looking at this is life under the sun. Okay? And we don't have to live this life. Okay? If we do nothing, then this is what we're going to get. If we say, listen, I'm not going to get involved, I'm not going to do anything, I'm going to just, be my own person, and then this is what we're going to get. This is the best that life will be without God. So, again, there are some good points to it. There are some advantages. You can enjoy your work. You can do that. But without God actively in the picture, Ecclesiastes is as good as it's going to get. Okay? Any questions?
What do they call shop class?
Production tech.
Never heard
Yeah. Question is, what do they call shop class at the high school? Yeah, it's called production tech. But yeah, they got better tools than I've got. I know that. That's because
Do you have your paperwork filed yet for running for mayor? Is that in order yet, or what?
I'm working on it.
What's the deadline?
I'm working on it.